Hello everyone, Kerwin Gaines here again on the agenda. This week we're with Chief Tracy of the Wilmington Police Department. Welcome, Chief, to the agenda.
No, thank you for having me.
Yes, your first time on the show and we appreciate you being here. We appreciate any time law enforcement is here and we appreciate your service, okay?
Well, thank you, sir.
That being said, a lot of the community, now how long have you been here as the chief?
5 years.
5 years now, right? And still there's some places in the community, some people in the community, it's like, I don't know who the chief is, who's the chief, but you have been in law enforcement for how many years now?
I started over 38 years ago.
Over 38 years, and you've been with some of the major departments in the city, such as
NYPD. And in Chicago.
And then in Chicago. And these are huge departments, and you've had senior roles in those departments. So tell us a little bit about the NYPD in Chicago and what you did there.
Well, I started back in 1984, January of 1984 in the NYPD. I followed the footsteps of my father, who was a Bronx homicide detective. It's something that I always wanted to do. I'm named after my uncle, who's been a Catholic priest for 50 years. And I didn't know if I wanted to become a priest or a police officer. And then certainly I made the choice of police officer, got married, and I have 5 kids. So obviously I made that decision. Spent close to almost 24 years in the NYPD, rose up the ranks and ran some pretty prestigious units within that. I was given an awesome responsibility, and I appreciate the people that had confidence in me. Shortly thereafter, I went to the private sector and I ran a global position for Citigroup, business continuity, crisis management, and traveled all over the world. Then I was in, after a couple of years, with a wife and 5 kids, you don't realize how much you're away from your family. And I went into the private sector in a company that had about 4,000 employees, and I ran operations for security in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. I got an opportunity in 2011. Gary McCarthy was appointed by Rahm Emanuel after he won the election for mayor in Chicago. He said, hey, I need a right-hand person to help me run the Chicago Police Department. You understand the systems, the management, and what we accomplished in the NYPD. Can you help create crime control strategies and help us out in Chicago and overseeing all those operations? I said, I was glad to get back in policing because I probably left too young. And I left my calling way too young, and I realized that when I was in the private sector. Spent 5 years in Chicago. We had major accomplishments. We've had some high-profile incidents. But at the end of the day, when I left Chicago in the end of 2015, I went back in the private sector to a global security company. And then I got a call. It was a company that was outsourced to try to find the next police chief for the first time in the city of Wilmington in over 200-year history. At first, I told them I wasn't interested. I'm very happy in Chicago. My family, my wife and 5 kids enjoyed it here. Went back home and talked to my wife. She asked me, do you really want to get back into policing? I said, yeah, I think there's a lot more to do, and I think this city has an opportunity for improvement in the things that we can bring to it. And I looked at this mayor, Mayor Pizicki, didn't know him, and said, I like what he said, to be elected. He's a businessman. And what I love about businessmen is that they give you the tools to succeed, and they hold you accountable, and they let you run things. And I said, well, that's a perfect environment if you need to make change in a place that's never had an outside chief. And the rest is history. There was a nationwide search. There was a lot of candidates in it, and at the end of the day, I was the last one standing. And the mayor and I worked out a few things that we thought that how this city can succeed. And here I am talking to you 5 years later, and not without challenges, because the last couple of years has been unprecedented, almost close to 9/11, but
right.
Not like 9/11 that I was through in the NYPD. But I'll tell you, one of the most challenging times in policing for this country and everything for what has happened, that I'm sure we'll get into that.
Yeah, off the air we were talking about pivot points, right? There's pivot points in time, there's pivot points in careers, there's pivot points in family and things that you need to do. And 2020 was definitely a pivot point, not just for this country, but for this city. And when it comes to law enforcement and the treatment of minorities and African Americans, that has been a history of mistreatment. And that goes without saying, and there's record of that. Mm-hmm. But right here in the city, there has been some resentment towards the police. And there has been, a lot of pushback from community members and even the city council. But for you, and you're talking about management, you're talking about business, what is it like to run a police department during these times and with the Black Lives Matter movement and just I think the microscope of that law enforcement is under right now? How are you managing the city? How are you managing this police department through those times?
Right, and you know, we were talking before we started the interview. They always say practice makes perfect. No, I believe perfect practice makes perfect. And some of the things that, when I first came to the department, you have to take a look at things internally. And the mayor and I talked about it. It'll probably be a year till we could start seeing external success. And that's right from crime strategies to community engagement. We had to change the model and the business model, the way we were doing things here. And the biggest thing is community engagement. I think the things that we built up with community engagement, and where we kept the same officers in the same area, working that shift every time that they came to work, instead of moving around the area, so they can get to know the conditions and get to know the people. How do you get past differences? You got to get to know each other. And then we have 49 civic associations. Within those associations, we were not going to any of the meetings. So when we said we didn't have time to go, I looked at where our calls for service, we had time to go to these community meetings. We need to put ourselves out at them. And then we made sure that the people responsible that were working the shifts would go to these meetings. I'd have a captain of each area go to them. And when I could, I would try to make it as many meetings as possible so people can get to know this police chief and get to know me, not just from a segment where they see me speaking on TV. I wanted to see people, and I wanted them to see me. And I think it was very, very effective, and the officers loved it, because they were basically, culturally, sometimes you're ingrained not to speak with the community. But once you have those conversations, I think those are the things building up to the time that we talked about, from the time that you just talked about with Black Lives Matter, what happened in Minneapolis. You know, that opened up a lot of old wounds or current wounds, as far as where in policing, we've got it wrong for a lot of years. And all these things that against black and brown communities going back a couple hundred years, the enforcers were the police. And, you know, we were responsible for enforcing some of these bad laws. And therefore, there's a generational narrative that goes down, rightfully so, that there's mistrust in policing. Now, we have to recognize that. We have to look at it. We have to be very empathetic and compassionate about it. But at the same time, we also have to say, how do we get past that? So you need a leader to take a look at it, understand it, make sure our officers understand it, but then to have these conversations that we're talking about now, or have those conversations with the community. I mean, one of my first meetings in the first year was at Mother African Church on Franklin Street, where I met with everybody in the community, where it was predominantly African American. And we had these conversations, and they got to know the chief. Do you understand it? Are you a person that's going to be able to move us forward? Make your officers understand it. And I think we had a very good, robust conversation, and I was open to it. And, you know, people say it's tough, but it's not tough if you're sincere about it, you're open to listening, and it's a two-way conversation. And mostly my listening and them getting to understand. And I think that was one of those tipping points to make sure the community got to know me. I haven't met all the community. Certainly the last 2 years have been very difficult, because not only what had happened with George Floyd, and then the protests and everything, and certainly the narrative of now an anti-police sentiment, and some of it we've earned, some of it we haven't. But we also then had COVID on top of that, and that created a separation where we had to avoid each other. We couldn't meet anymore. We had to make sure we kept space. So that separated us more. And what I talked about—
But it also increases tension in the community.
Absolutely. People are losing their jobs. They're not going to school. They're worried about, in the beginning, we didn't know how bad this was going to be. So there's anxiety, and high anxiety, and you put that in a situation where sometimes things had high anxiety. You add that to it. How do you get through that? And how you get through is what I taught our officers when I first came in: police legitimacy and procedural justice. Treat everyone as you would want your family member treated if they came in contact with a police officer. Make sure that we're doing things fairly, constitutionally, respectfully, and listening and being neutral. When you give respect to the community, even when people are in heightened times or in crisis, it's not personal. What you have to be able to respect the dignity of the person that you're dealing with. That will come back tenfold, because then you start to get compliance, because people trust the police more. And when you get compliance, you get less of those incidents where we see things go sideways in the United States and sometimes even locally. And then nationally, that gets played over and over again, which actually creates a divide. If we can get more compliance because people trust us, then maybe we can lessen the incidence of confrontation.
I like the trust comment. So what is the pulse right now of the city, in your opinion, right? I seriously doubt you went out and did some type of census, but what is the pulse right now of two things? One, let's say the city of Wilmington in regards to the police department. How do you feel? And the second one I'll get to is what is the pulse of the Wilmington police officers out now that are here that need to go out and protect the city? Like, so the first one is the people of the city. How do you think they feel about the police department?
Well, there's two questions, but they're actually connected and they're not mutually exclusive. So I might answer the second one with overall. What I saw even during the most trying times, after what happened in Minneapolis, May 30th, we did have a lot of motions that came into the city. We actually had individuals all day long we walked with, and having that conversation, even in front of this building that we're sitting in, we had 400 or 500 protesters. I was actually on the front line speaking to them. The mayor actually came out and spoke. And then everybody was ready to go home for the day. Everybody marched. You can march anywhere you want in the city. You know, we wanted to make sure we facilitated things, the First Amendment right to free speech, and also at the same time make sure nobody got hit by a car, making sure we keep the safety and allow them to do it. At the end of the day, you know, everybody left and peacefully left. And then there might have been some outside influences that didn't want to see it that way. And actually, you saw what happened towards the end of the night, and we were able to get the city back by the end of the night, and then we were able to clean up. But most of the community came together, even though there was an expression of outrage and people wanting to be heard, which I can see that, and we talked about the past narrative and the way people feel. There was more people that came together that, you know, we're not hearing their voices because they're the silent majority. And a lot of the protests after that, when they was talking about defunding the police and seeing what was happening in other cities, our city, we had a couple hundred protests after that, but we didn't see what was happening in other cities. And you know why? Because the community is the one that can be the person that can drive that. And our community did not want that to happen again. And we had some people with very loud voices, but the community in itself said, we support you, we don't want to lose you. And we had so many people that came up to our offices and said, we don't believe in the overall narrative that we're hearing out there. Yeah, we're upset about some things that happen, but we believe in you and we want you and we don't want you to leave our community. So they wanted us to continue to make sure that we policed in a respectful manner in the communities. So I think that's what really, where people were hearing a lot of rhetoric and things that might bring police officers down. We were hearing through community meetings, although the community meetings were starting to end because we couldn't meet because of COVID and some of the things, and we had protests, but we were hearing from all those things and those connections we made for the first couple of years going to community meetings. We had that relationship where people were calling up to support us. They weren't vocal, but you were getting them face-to-face conversations that we weren't having before I got here. And I got a tremendous amount of phone calls. Chief, thank you, please. We don't want to be like other cities, and we support the police. We just want to be treated fairly. And that's an easy ask.
So you're saying the consensus of the city right now is job well done?
I wouldn't say job well done. There's in policing, there can be controversial incidents. There's always, each and every day, we got to earn the trust of the community. We got to work together with the community. We can have the best crime strategies in the world, and we can go out and execute them, but we won't have long-term sustainable success unless we're doing it with the community. We've had improvements, and we have ebbs and flows because incidents can start to lose trust. But at the end of the day, it's very fragile, and we got to make sure that we sustain it, continue to do what we're doing. And as we come out of this pandemic, and we come out of these things, we're getting to more and more community meetings. We're out in the community. We're able to get out of the cars again because we're also not disrupted and distracted. And what I really didn't talk about, there could be some days I have 40 officers out with COVID and/or isolation from tracing. So we as police officers were affected with our families and everything else. So I was making sure we can keep everything under control the last couple of years and try to make sure that the city, as best as possible, treated everybody fairly, tried to make sure that we made the necessary arrests. And think about this, where the courts and the institutions were closing down. We as police officers, the last couple of years, made record number of gun arrests to try to keep this place safe, because there were individuals, and some violent individuals, who were very few, that were getting back out and causing harm in the community. And the community kept asking us, can you do something? And we did. And a lot of them appreciate that. But we got a lot of more work to do. We always have more work to do. So there's progress, no victory lap, and we have to earn that each and every day. And where I think that stands now, we always got to improve on that. And I think the conversations where I can get out more and our officers can get out more, and we can get to more of these community meetings and get the point out of what we're trying to do, I think there's always room for improvement. And I think the overall consensus of a silent majority out there is good. I wouldn't say it's great. It's good, because we have so much more work to do coming out of this pandemic.
Yeah, and it's a very tough time to, I guess, to grade, but tough times is what a police department deals with, right? You don't have all teddy bears and sunsets. When you're a police officer, you have to deal with hard things. Now, the second part to the question was the rank and file police officers that are doing the job every day. It's not a secret, there's been tension within the department. What is the pulse of the department right now? How does it feel? Are the officers upset? Their roles have changed basically as police officers. There's more scrutiny, and then they have internal scrutiny within the department. So tell us a little bit about the feel.
Well, it takes a special type of person to become a police officer to begin with. These are real people with real families that run into real danger each and every day. When I talked about those 600 gun arrests that we've made in the last couple of years, that's really an armed confrontation. People don't say, oh, you have a gun, let me just give this over to your officer. Yeah, actually, it's basically almost an armed confrontation. And the training that they have in place, very proud of how they've done it, where we haven't had incidents that have gone sideways, I always say. And that's through training. And when you get training and you have support and you have the leadership that's engaged with the rank and file, they feel confident in the mission that you're doing it together. That in itself, when they're seeing things that are happening and some outside voices that, you talked about that there is some criticism and under a microscope, I think the officers, they understand it comes with the job. They understand what happens. We might not all like it, but we certainly signed up for that. And how you comport yourself and how you deal with things, we just have to make sure that when they keep hearing from the community, thank you very much, that keeps them going. That keeps them going. And I think internally, you talked about some things that might have come up recently. It's in any organization, as well as you think it's running, there are going to be issues. And what you have to do is you got to take them seriously and then try to make sure that you're addressing them, because if it's a small issue, it could become a bigger issue. If it's a bigger issue, let's get on top of it. Let's look internally with the leadership. Let's talk to informal leaders. Now, when I say informal leaders, you don't have to have rank to be a leader in an organization. You look at a football team, the locker room sometimes make sure that it doesn't become a bigger issue. And I have people with time, master corporals, that don't have rank of all demographics, black, white, Hispanic, females. They actually can approach me. They see me in the hallways, they see me downstairs going into the garage, they see me out in the street. And a lot of them know they can come up and speak to me. And a lot of them say, hey, listen, we got a couple issues over here, but it might have been blown out of proportion. And certainly some have come up and said, and all demographics, and said this is the best they've seen a police department run in 30 years. Although we're going to still have our issues, let's just keep moving forward and resolve those issues.
Being the agenda, right, we always try to make sure that we are asking the questions that our viewership and the citizens basically of Wilmington are our biggest viewership would ask. And as you said, there has been something recently where there's been a trophy in one of your squad rooms that said that the gentleman was the whitest black person and he won a trophy for it. Now, you're always, regardless in time, you're going to have people who have that mindset. Okay, 20 years from now, as long as there's a difference in people, you're going to have issues of racism or what have you. But for this was a trophy that was in that office for a couple of years prior to its discovery. That wasn't discovered by senior leadership, but was posted, I guess, via social media by a passerby. what is it about the police culture that allows for something that systemic racism within the doors of this facility to occur for years and years and years, and it's not being said? So that tells me, and I think it's telling our viewership, that it's almost accepted here, regardless of who is in command, but it's accepted. Is that the case, Chief?
No, that's not the case. And here's, immediately when that came to light, I started an internal investigation, and I also came out publicly. That's something that we don't condone in a professional environment here or anywhere else you work. Something like that should not be given out, should not be accepted, and it shouldn't be displayed. And it was immediately removed, and it's something I would never condone, not now, and not 20 years ago, not 30 years ago when I started policing, or 38 years ago. So we have an investigation, we take that seriously, and we make sure that we talk about these things. If someone's not getting that, and you know, even in this situation, the officer that had the trophy it was not offensive to that officer.
But could he really, if that's the environment, if that's the environment where we're passing out awards for being the most Caucasian person on the shift, which is a whole different conversation.
Right.
Do we feel that that environment is comfortable? Is it an environment that someone can file a complaint? I mean, if I'm in a room full of people who are accepting of this behavior, I don't, because I have a pension, because I have a family, and because I enjoy my career, I don't want to raise my hand and say that this is wrong. So you kind of go along to get along?
Right.
So do you think that could possibly be it? Whether or not, I mean, it's easy for the officer, and I don't know the officer, I'm not speaking on his or her behalf, but to say, you know what, I'm just going to let this slide because things are good right now.
Right. And that's a great point. I talked about it earlier. It's about understanding what racism is, what blacks have been through, and what's the narrative that's come down that's absolutely has a lot of merit to it. When something like this happens, when I find out about it, as it comes up, it's something that how you address it and how you try to move forward from it. Do we condone it? Absolutely not. Are we addressing it? Yes. Is there an investigation that's going on? And when it came to light, I take it very seriously. So we don't repeat the same things that have happened in the past. And I think that's the only way to move forward from this. And we keep talking about, yes, are there issues in this world with implicit bias and racism? Yeah, we have to talk about it. And this is certainly one of those things. It's not acceptable. It's not acceptable to me, and it's not acceptable to the police department. And the individuals involved, however, might have accepted it, that were around it, it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable, and it starts with leadership. How do I address it? And that's how I am addressing it. And then it brings light to it that, okay, you think this is in jest, but this is not acceptable. And we're going to investigate, we're investigating it accordingly. And it starts with the leadership and my recognition of it, that it's not right. And then openly, I can only say so much about it because it's under ongoing investigation, but I can talk about the idea of it, and I came out very strongly and publicly on how I feel about it. I can't talk about investigation, but I can talk about a certain incident and what it implies or what it doesn't imply. I'll tell you right now. I made that statement. I believe in it, and I always have. And you know, if you can go back in time and interview all the units that I've run in my 38-year careers, very diverse, and people know where I stand on that. It's not acceptable.
Yeah. So the big question that I have for you, and I'm sure the people of the city are happy to hear that, right? And we can, you come on the agenda, so they're expecting it, and we're very pleased to that. But the vote of no confidence on top of that, this has been a really rough year so far, 2021 for you, from the city council. And people can say, and it wasn't the entire city council who voted no confidence. It was a select few, well, a majority. But how would you address that as a leader? I mean, I've had jobs before where, you know, my boss wasn't exactly happy with how I'm doing. But fortunately, you have several bosses, right? You have the citizens, you have council, you have the mayor's office, you have, you know, so many others. So
my wife,
your wife, right? And I'm not going to ask him.
Don't forget her if she watches that.
Right.
But this is serious.
So how do you address that? Like how do you fix it? Because I know you want to fix it, right? Talking to you, you seem a man of honor and integrity. So when you get those type of votes, you want to fix it. So what do you do to fix that?
Right, and when you see things that are voted on, I mean, it was a handful of council people, although it wasn't a majority of the council, it was a majority at that vote.
Okay.
Okay, and when that did come out, it was a little surprising. It was a little.
Did it take you by surprise?
For the vote to come out that day, and then like a couple hours before to be put on agenda, and then to have a vote like that, yeah, I was surprising. It was surprising to the police department. It was surprising to my officers. I think we all were a little surprised by it. And you know, the thing that we have to do is these officers are doing a very difficult job. This police department is doing a very difficult job, and we're not perfect, but we tried to get everything right. And I think, you know, the fine line is I want to continue to keep them working, know we have support, and making sure they understand that something like this can happen, but you still have the support, and not to misinterpret these things, that sometimes politics could be involved in it, because it was a vote of no confidence. The way I look at it is that some of the things that were said about where the no confidence came from was about diversity, and that was the main thing, about diversity. Where we've been in with diversity, you know, 2.5 years ago, or almost 3 years ago, a council member had asked us, can you make sure that you do a report, which we put out quarterly. It was met with very favorable reviews each quarter when it came out, from emails back or publicly when we've been speaking about it. What surprised me is that my head of administration and my inspector and my captain that oversees the academy and also oversees promotions and recruitment, both are African American. So we're doing everything that we can to make sure we bring diversity in. And we were complimented last class that we were getting good diversity from council members that actually voted that we weren't. And
so diversity, would you say, sorry to cut you off, Chief, diversity is definitely at the top of your list of priorities for this city in regards to its police department?
Absolutely. I mean, the city is a minority majority city. And you would like to make sure that you have a police department that's representative of what the community looks like. That would be in any city, depending where the demographics are. But when you get diversity, you also make sure you get diversity of thought, diversity of culture, diversity of experiences. So you want to make sure you have that. Is it ever going to be perfect? No. But the only way to overcome some of the differences is to make sure, I talked about community meetings, getting to know each other, making sure we see each other, and making sure we understand each other and we're treating each other respectfully, and we're doing things constitutionally and fairly. When it came to that, you know, our last class was very diverse, and it was acknowledged by the city council about we are getting diversity. January 1st, that quarterly report came out prior to this vote, and we were already on the pace to be about 70% African American if the percentages played out, who was left in the process of 102 applicants, and who was left in the process. And we have an academy that just started Monday. And in that academy class, we have over 75% of the applicants are minorities. And
well,
so
it sounds like you're on the right foot.
and that's why when you hear something that's brought up as the main issue, it was a little surprising, because there's so much work that's being done by our officers within the organization, and how much effort that goes in to make sure that we can get to where we need to be. The officers are like, why is this being said about us that we're not doing our job? And so I have to make sure that I keep us going and make sure that they don't get distracted by this. We're doing the right thing, we know it, people have complimented it, but there might be some things that are said that I'll take stock in. And if there's things that are said and why they do it, listen, I'm not going to be able to please everyone, but I know where my heart of heart and where I'm sincere about trying to do the right thing for policing and for this community. You know, some of the elected officials, they're not voted in 100% of the vote.
Right.
And so they have to make sure that the ones that didn't vote for them try to find out what they need to do to bring them along and make sure that they understand what they're trying to do. And that's what I have to do. So when I see that, I got to make sure I take stock that, you know, there probably is some reasoning. I'm going to, and I looked at it, I take it very seriously, and I can see if I'm making sure I'm improving on it, and their voices have been heard, and I hear them, and I'm doing things that I can internally and externally to make sure I can meet some of the concerns that they have or concerns within my police department.
Well, we appreciate it, and I'm sorry to cut you short. Unfortunately, it's only a half-hour show, but I have so many other questions that I'd like to ask. But I would tell you that the assurances that you've given us in regards to diversity, we look forward to that, and we look forward to seeing what that's bringing. And we also look forward to knowing how the police department has changed. And we look forward to having you back right here on the agenda.
Well, absolutely, because there's so much more that I would love to get into in this half-hour segment that I think the community needs to hear about the great job that our officers are doing and how they're working with community members. And I think there's so much more to talk about that's not getting out here. And I want to thank you and your team for allowing me to come on and being able to talk about some things that just we're not getting out in the press, but this actually gives us an opportunity to discuss some of these delicate issues, serious issues, and thank you very much for your time as well.
Thank you, Chief Tracy. We appreciate you right here on the agenda. And we look forward to seeing you next week on the agenda.